Rain hammered the clearing as Caleb stopped cold, heart pounding, eyes locked on the impossible. A lion stood between a terrified girl and a pack of circling coyotes, not as a threat, but as her protector. Its body was tense, eyes blazing, every muscle ready, but not to strike. And then, it did something no one could have expected. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. The desert dusk deepened around Caleb, shadows bleeding into each other as the last orange slivers of sun disappeared behind the ridgeline. The stillness that followed the lion's roar was eerie, unnatural, like the world had momentarily stopped breathing. Caleb's boots crunched through dry gravel as he descended the narrow trail that wound toward the sound. His pulse pounded in his ears, not from fear, but urgency. The kind of urgency born from guilt that had never let go. The lion came into view just past a stand of twisted mesquite. It was massive, regal even in its suffering. Its body coiled in raw fury and panic. Thick coils of muscle beneath its tawny hide twitched uncontrollably. The wire trap, old and rust-speckled, had curled tight around the beast's forepaw, cutting to the bone in places. Blood painted the rock beneath it, black in the fading light. The lion's breaths were ragged, its flanks rising and falling with a frantic rhythm that screamed of both pain and defiance. Caleb crouched low, instinctively making himself smaller, whispering softly, a mantra of comfort spoken not to calm the lion, but himself. His hands moved with the precision of a medic, every motion deliberate, rehearsed 1,000 times in a different war. But this wasn't combat. This was confession. With every inch closer, the old shame burned hotter in his gut. The moment he froze, the day his daughter's eyes rolled back and her body convulsed under a searing sun. The ambulance had come too late. His inaction, his hesitation, had already written the end. Now, another life hung in balance. And this time, he would not falter. The lion snapped its head toward him, baring teeth slick with blood and foam. Caleb didn't flinch. Instead, he extended a shaking hand and waited. Seconds dragged. The lion stared, confused, exhausted. And then, it let him. Kneeling at the creature's side, Caleb worked the cutters with trembling fingers. Each snip of the rusted wire felt like slicing through years of guilt, inch by inch. Sweat stung his eyes. Blood soaked through his jeans. Twice the lion jerked, and Caleb nearly lost his grip, but he held on. Finally, with a final twist and a hiss of snapped tension, the trap sprang loose. The lion didn't leap or roar. It simply looked at Caleb, holding his gaze with a depth that startled him. Not wild, not mindless, but aware. Then, with a heavy breath and a limping step, the lion turned and disappeared into the trees. Caleb watched until it was gone, his chest heaving not from exertion, but release. He had moved. He had acted. And for the first time in 10 years, the silence that followed didn't feel like judgment. The headlines did more than stain Caleb Mason's reputation. They twisted the knife that guilt had long ago embedded in his chest. What began as whispers among rangers curdled into full-blown hysteria once the first video hit the internet. The lion, unmistakable with its matted mane and slight limp, stood on the ridge above Caleb's trailer, motionless as a statue, eyes fixed with unblinking intent. It looked like judgment incarnate. The footage looped endlessly on local news. 10 seconds of stillness, a long zoom, a fade to black, and the words, "The hunter returns." In town, eyes followed Caleb like searchlights. At the gas station, mothers pulled their children close. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when he walked into a store. Rumors mutated faster than truth could catch up. Some said the lion had stalked him to the preserve's edge. Others claimed it circled his trailer nightly. It didn't matter that Caleb never saw it face to face again. The illusion of danger was more intoxicating than facts. Frank DeLuca leaned into the panic like a man shielding himself from accountability. He spoke in clipped sound bites and legalese, citing escalating threats to public safety and failure to report continued contact with a predator species. Caleb's volunteer ID was stripped in a cold office meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. No handshake, no thank you, just a folded paper and a warning not to return. The word liability echoed louder than any apology. But Caleb knew better. He saw meaning in the patterns others feared. The shredded antelope, the claw marks not near his bed, but by the threshold, as if drawn there deliberately. Not warnings, but messages. The lion had left something behind, intention. At night, the preserve grew silent in a way that unnerved even Caleb. He would walk the canyon ridge, a lantern in one hand, the other brushing the sidearm he never unholstered. Each footstep was a vow. I will not run. I will not fear what I've freed. He thought often of the lion's eyes, the moment they'd locked just before it vanished into the trees. Not rage, not vengeance, something else, something no camera could capture, no headline could exploit. Recognition. They called him a fool, a man too soft to know danger. But deep in his marrow, where his daughter's memory still burned, Caleb believed. The lion remembered, just not what they thought. The sky broke open like a wound. Lightning flashed jagged white across the horizon, casting skeletal shadows of mesquite and pine along the canyon walls. Rain began as a whisper, then turned to a deluge, drumming on the brittle earth and masking all but the pounding of Caleb's feet. He shouldn't have been there. His presence on sanctuary grounds violated a formal ban, yet something elemental had stirred within him when he saw the clouds boiling over the ridges. It wasn't curiosity. It was certainty. Something was about to go wrong. The school bus had come for a nature tour. Laughter and paper bag lunches, squeaky sneakers on gravel paths. But now the air reeked of ozone and dread. A ranger's shout cut through the rain. "We've got one missing!" The news spread fast, splintering order into chaos. Flashlights flicked on. Radios crackled. Search teams deployed in every direction. Parents cried. Teachers scrambled to count heads. Caleb didn't ask permission. He just moved, away from the noise of human panic. There was a feeling in his ribs, something ancient and magnetic, pulling him north along a narrow deer trail, half flooded and slick with red clay. Then he heard it. Not thunder. A roar. Low, measured, territorial. Not the cry of a beast in pain, but a warning. He followed the sound, ducking beneath thorny branches and stumbling over slick rock. The rain stung his face, clung to his eyelashes. And then, there they were. A child, curled and shivering between two jagged boulders. Her jacket soaked, hair matted to her face, eyes wide and unfocused. And standing over her, as still and deliberate as a monument carved from flesh and will, the lion. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. The animal stood between her and danger, muscles tense, shoulders lowered. Behind them, coyotes lingered in the underbrush, half a dozen, gaunt and hungry, their amber eyes glowing like coals. One crept closer. Then the lion moved. The roar tore through the forest like cannon fire, raw and righteous, shaking rain from the trees. The coyotes scattered, spooked not just by the sound but the presence behind it, a force older than their hunger. Caleb stepped into view. The lion turned its head slowly. Their eyes met, and in that eternal second, something passed between them. A memory, a trust, a knowing. Then, impossibly gently, the lion nudged the girl forward with its massive head. She stumbled into Caleb's arms. He clutched her tight, shielding her as he backed away. The lion didn't move, just stood there, watching, rain matting its fur to its ribs. Then, gone. Into the trees, as if it had never been there. By the time Caleb returned to the lodge, the storm was breaking. Light spilled from the windows, framing the huddle of drenched figures on the porch. Frank DeLuca's face was pale, his mouth open. "It protected her?" he asked, his voice thin and disbelieving. Caleb, soaked to the bone, met his eyes and nodded once. He remembered. The world devoured the story like a parched field, swallowing rain. Within hours, Caleb Mason's name surged across continents. News anchors recited the tale with the reverence of scripture. The lion who returned, the girl who was saved, the man who had once been forgotten, now remembered by the very creature he saved. People wept in living rooms and airport terminals. Artists painted the scene in vivid oils. Musicians composed sweeping melodies in its honor. Online forums exploded with awe and gratitude. Proof that love crosses species. God works in paw prints. This gave me hope again. The sanctuary, once silent with doubt and bureaucracy, transformed overnight. Tourists arrived by the thousands. Children pressed their hands to the viewing glass, asking rangers if the lion who remembered would come again. Caleb's suspension was lifted with a formal apology, though none was needed. His title was restored, his name etched into park history. But something greater than position had been returned to him. Belief. Not in policies or reputation, but in meaning. At the edge of the ridge where it all began, the preserve unveiled a memorial cast in bronze. It showed a man kneeling, arm outstretched, hand just brushing the mane of a lion who met him halfway. Not crouched, not aggressive, but calm. Equal. A shared gaze forged in unspoken memory. They named it the moment of trust. Visitors lingered before it, whispering prayers, promises, or nothing at all, letting silence do the speaking. Caleb didn't bask in attention. He never chased interviews, never tried to explain what had happened that day. Some things, he believed, were meant to remain untamed by language. He settled back into his rhythm, waking before dawn, walking trails alone, his boots stirring up the scent of creosote and juniper. But the lion was gone. No tracks, no distant roars, as if the earth had swallowed it back into legend. Until one morning, nearly a year later, when the sun rose in full fire over the hills, Caleb, mug in hand, stood on his porch like he had every day before. And then he saw it. High on the distant ridge, outlined in molten gold, the lion stood. Older now, its mane streaked with time, a scar like lightning across its shoulder. It didn't move. It didn't roar. It simply watched. Caleb didn't breathe. Then, slowly, the lion lowered its head. A single, deliberate bow. And with that, it turned, disappearing once more into the wilderness, not like a ghost, but like a guardian, returning to silence. Caleb's voice cracked with a whisper carried only by wind. "You did good too, friend." Because in a world that too often forgets, the wild had remembered, and that truly was the miracle.